Hello, I'm Carrie Gard, and welcome to Tea Time with Tech Marketing Leaders. Welcome back to the show. This will be the second to last time at this time. So it is 3 p.m. Eastern right now. And I'm really sorry to my West Coasters, but we are going to move a smidge earlier to your 8 a.m. Pacific time in 2 weeks. 2 weeks we will be at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Sorry, really sorry. But I have these little 8-year-olds that are getting older and think it's time to stay up later. And so they've been causing some riffraff at bedtime. And you know what? This is all I get. So I got to be here for it. And I am here for it, which means I got to move my podcast a little earlier. That just means we get to have tea time at actual tea time. It's going to be wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at 8 a.m. Pacific in 2 weeks. Next week is going to be an interesting one because I got a double whammy for y'all. I got an 8 a.m. and a 3 p.m. So we're going to ease on into this new transition. It's going to be good and glorious, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm so excited for this conversation today. You know what? I'm going to be honest with you all. I'm having mixed feels about today's conversation because I think we're all kind of tired of having to have this conversation. It's an important conversation to have, and we keep needing to have it until it is fixed. But also, we're all kind of tired of having it. Maybe JD is going to fix it for us all. Before we get there into the heart of what it means to be marketing and sales aligned, there is a day. There will be a day, and I'm here for it. I'm standing on my pedestal. I'm holding up my flag, and I'm saying there will be a day where sales and marketing will be aligned, and it will be glorious. And JD is going to help us get there. Before though, a little bit about Mr. J.D. Miller. I gotta pull my notes up. So I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna cut this out. It's gonna be so good. Yay for production, my production team. I appreciate you. Okay, a little bit about J.D. Miller. He is a sales-oriented executive leader. He has a long track record of working with PE-backed or pre-IPO firms through their growth into very large public companies. His special skills and advisory experience includes leading sales transformations, building high-performance sales teams, and implementing quick growth sales strategies with an eye towards operationalizing and formalizing approaches needed by large public companies.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Oh, it is, but wait, this gets so good. We're not done yet here, JD. As a true smarketing advocate, he also brings a lot of experience in bridging the gap between sales and marketing with an emphasis on content-based marketing, social selling, account-based marketing, and Web 2.0 social media strategies. JD, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the introduction.
I love this introduction. I was like, it's the beauty of having kids and them, having to reach them every night. You sort of get better at this whole reading aloud thing. But this was definitely.
You found my LinkedIn and you did a great job with it. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you did my job for me, let's be honest. But this whole smarketing thing, which you also mentioned in your LinkedIn post that I had to reshare, is just so good. Before we get there, though, this is just a recap of stuff you do, but more importantly, how you got there. So what's your story? What do you do now?
Oh, my story.
And how'd you get there?
Yeah. So today I'm a chief revenue officer for a tech company backed by private equity. I also do advisory work for PE firms and serve as coach and mentor to CROs and CMOs. In PE-backed environments. But I began actually in college thinking I was going to be a lawyer. I am a graduate of the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and I thought I was going to go to law school. And so I had this major in communication and philosophy and a minor in literature. And it's a great pre-law curriculum. I interned, I'm old, I'll date myself. I interned in the Clinton White House in 1996. And I was not the most famous White House intern of the Clinton White House in 96.
Thank goodness for that.
But the experience really taught me that I didn't want to be a lawyer. And I didn't know what to do. And so I went back and I said, well, I'm not going to be a professional philosopher. I'm not going to be a professional comparative literaturer. Maybe there's something in this communication degree. And I started doing research on how groups form online. Again, it was the late 90s, so the internet was brand new. We knew a lot about how to develop trusted relationships in person, but nothing about how to do it over the internet. And we never imagined video conferencing like this. And so I wound up with a master's in social networks in 96. And then a .com came calling. So I was employee number 26 at a company that was eventually acquired by Vignette. Vignette became the world's largest tech IPO until Google took our title. Went public with a $9 billion valuation. And in 6 years, we went from 26 employees to 6,000. And I just thought, geez, I didn't think I wanted to be in sales, but this is pretty easy. Little did I know in 2000, your sales pitch was, I'm calling from the internet. You need a website. And, every airline needed a website. Every newspaper needed a website. So I had these great early sales years. And the rest of my career has been really just chasing that experience again and again and again. So I've sort of settled into this, it's always B2B. It's always tech. Now it's all, cloud-based software. And I've grown up through the sales ranks, first as a sales engineer, a sales manager. I was a CMO. I'm a CRO. And now I'm in my 6th company that private equity owns and is, looking at how do we clean up sales organizations and create bigger value for everyone.
I have so many questions. It's interesting because you started in networking, social networking, before there was social networking, which is just fascinating. And then it seems like that's really helped you throughout. I'm going to go on a tangent, y'all, but just bear with me for a second. When you studied social networking versus where social networking has ended up today, is it on par? Is it on track? Is it totally different? What's sort of your
it's so interesting.
Opinion?
Yeah, it's really amazing because the academic research plays out today. It's a different medium, when it's Facebook or Twitter or something, but the core pieces are exactly the same today as they were 25 years ago. So when I was in grad school, and eventually I got a PhD in this, we used to build all of these network diagrams. We would call people up and say, tell me who are all of your friends and how much time do you spend talking to each one of your friends? And we would talk to each of those people and we would, draw these big diagrams of who's connected to who. And there's a science about who are influence makers, who are opinion leaders, all of that kind of stuff. And so then when I wrote my dissertation, I had convinced, there was a software company that gave me access to a year's worth of their email for 3,000 employees, which of course you could never do that today because of privacy issues. But, back then we didn't know about email. But all I took is, here's 3,000 employees and just looked through a year's worth of email, who emails who, and built a network diagram that, who are the people that are really central and who are the people on the outside. And over a year, just based on where people sit in the information network, you could predict who is going to get promoted, who is going to quit, who is going to be the person you should talk to then influence the rest of the world. Now, all of that exists today. We're sitting on the brink of an election. 4 years ago, the U.S. presidential election, everyone was talking about Facebook and that rise of fake news, which is really the application of that data that I can't actually market to every single American voter. But if I have access to the data of who are the most influential voices, or today we call them influencers, but it's all about who's sitting in the middle of the network. If I can buy an ad to influence that person, they'll then broadcast, the message to their networks. I have a colleague of mine from grad school that didn't go into internet on this, but goes into public health. And so they show up in cities that have, outbreaks of socially transmitted diseases, syphilis, gonorrhea, stuff like that. And again, they can't go educate every single person in the city of Chicago, but they can look on social networks and say, who are the people that I need to target with a message about, behaving safely, or how diseases get transmitted. Same thing in COVID, wash your hands, wear a mask, all of that, and then, influence behavior. So it's a really cool kind of way to see that same skill got applied in many, many, many ways.
Today, in looking at social media behavior and targeting and marketing, I mean, there's so much data out there. It's sort of hard to figure out which data to look for. So when you're talking about finding that influencer and marketing to that person, is it the connectivity that they have? What is it that you're looking for to know that they have that kind of influence over others? That's
Yeah,
wild.
it's often connectivity, and even more important, it's not the person who has the most followers, it's the person who has the most diverse network of connections. And so, if you've got a whole group of friends who all talk to each other, and someone else has a whole group of friends who are all talking to each other, the person who bridges those two, you can influence them, and then it'll kind of dissipate through the network that way.
But how do you find them? That's a whole different
Yeah,
podcast.
it's a
I'm
whole
gonna
tricky
circle.
thing.
It is a whole
But
tricky thing, but it's
as a
important.
CMO, you think about micro targeting, and so much of when we talk about content-based marketing, or retargeting ads and different things, you can
Mm-hmm.
run a LinkedIn ad targeted at one company or one person. It costs you very little, but you can identify, like, who's the person who sits on 5 corporate boards. There's all this kind of data study about board interlock, and everyone's board of directors is public information. You can go to the website and see what boards people sit on and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So who is the person who sits on 5 or 6 boards that is going to say, hey, my company implemented this great software solution, and then those board members are going back to the companies whose boards they sit on, and it becomes really viral in that way. So it's a whole interesting kind of science that you can apply in so many different ways.
I promise you all we're going to get to the hot topic of this evening, but I want to sit here for a second because I feel like cracking the LinkedIn code has been so tricky. LinkedIn is incredibly expensive, and when you do it in a way that targets your exact right target audience to download document ads, you're going to spend a fortune. And I think what you're saying, JD, is it doesn't. I think two things you're saying. Back me up if I'm wrong here. One is it's not necessarily about your ideal customer profile. It's about the people who can influence those customers using board members as an example. And I think the second thing you're saying without saying it, but I want to be thoughtful, is I feel like in my experience, LinkedIn can be very cost effective if you're not trying to garner leads.
Right. Well, I mean, LinkedIn will say it's about creating a professional community and participating in a conversation. I mean, that is LinkedIn's,
It is, yep.
yes, they make money on advertising, but they don't say our mission is to be this great advertising platform. They say we're the professional network where professional conversations happen. And so the trick is, how do you participate in it in a way that, you know, the conversation goes your direction more often than not? Here's a great example, and here's where I became such a marketing fan. A couple of years ago, I worked for an underdog software company that was brand new to the US, and they sold us a scheduling solution for retail companies. And so the pitch was, we have all this data, and we know how many people are going to be in your jewelry store 3 weeks from now at 10 in the morning. And so by extension, if you're going to have 2 shoppers and you've scheduled 3 jewelers, you're wasting money. If you have 2 shoppers, you only have one jeweler, you're missing out on a $10,000 diamond ring sale. So let's schedule that stuff. Now, there was another big player in the market that had dominated the space for years. So when I was brand new, I was head of sales there, and I was about 3 weeks into the job, and the New York Times wrote this article called Working Anything But 9 to 5. And it was this story about a Starbucks barista named Jeanette Navarro. And it talked about how difficult Jeanette's life was because Starbucks wasn't scheduling her um, predictably. So, and she had a 10-year-old who if she got called in, she had to find daycare. She had sick parents who had doctor's appointments that, I got to reschedule the chemo appointment, all of this sort of stuff. So, my marketing team and I wrote a blog post under my name that said, poor Jeanette Navarro, if only she was scheduled by our software, or if only Starbucks was using our software instead of theirs, we could have told her 3 weeks in advance whether or not to schedule this. And there is a science of your followers and your commenters and participating in the conversation. So a very simple LinkedIn blog post for me, and back then the algorithm used to, really reward long form content. So it's like, 600 words from me, started to go viral. And all of a sudden I had 30,000 readers and 40,000 readers. And then my phone rang, and it was someone from the city of San Francisco, and said, the city of San Francisco is going to pass this law that says if you're a retailer, you need to post your employees' schedules at least 2 weeks in advance. And JD, would you like to come out for the bill signing and participate in that? Absolutely. So you go do that, and you meet some prospects there, and you have some contacts, and you write about that. And then the White House called. And, Valerie Jarrett in the Obama White House was considering a national retail workers' bill of rights. And JD, we've been looking on the internet. You seem to be the national expert on this topic. Now, I had worked at this company about 4 weeks. I didn't really know that much about retail workers' rights, but I happened to be positioned in the right place with the right connections that, what cost us very little for me to write and produce this blog post, goes viral, gets in front of the right people, laws are getting passed. And then of course, all of those, eventually it was prospects, right? All of those retailers, you better bet Starbucks gave me a call. You better bet all of the
Yeah.
brand name retailers were calling my company and wanting to have sales discussions. But it didn't start with, here's a LinkedIn banner ad about why my scheduling solution is so brilliant.
You joined in the conversation. Somebody was having a tough time, and they were an employee. I think this is so key. God, sorry guys. I promise we will come back. But I think this is so key because what's happening right now from a marketing perspective, I love your intake on this, JD, but it feels like as marketers, we're like, we need the VPs, we need the CXOs, we need these people to sign off. You do, but you need the people who need this thing, who are using this thing on a regular basis, to want in first. And I feel
Yep.
like this is such a beautiful example of targeting the user to say, we hear you, Janelle, we hear you, and you need this thing. And hey, yes,
Here it happens to
we have
be.
it, but also what's key about that is you don't necessarily need to use our product. You
Right.
just need to post it 2 weeks in advance. And that's just good practice for your employees and leading with what's in the best interest for that user at that time. I mean,
Absolutely.
right?
And that experience taught me so much about the integration of sales and marketing, and this word, smarketing, that
I love
Andrea
that
Brody
word.
is a marketer I worked with who taught me that. I think she picked it up from HubSpot. Um, but this idea that all of the pieces need to be rowing in the same direction. So, a seller, salespeople expected me as a sales leader to be like, well, you go on LinkedIn and you send a bunch of LinkedIn connections and say, hey, you run a retail business. How are you scheduling? Have I got a solution for you? Come demo it. And actually, no, it's much lighter touch than that. It's being a thought leader. It's understanding the space. Um, that then, when all of a sudden that retailer recognizes they have a problem, you're the person there who's seen as an authority, and now you're a companion who's solving a business problem together, not pushing a product that you maybe don't want.
Yes. Solving a business problem together. Can we get that in quotes and hung up really big? Talking to my producer and my assistant who are going to make quotes out of this stuff. Yes to that. It, try not to get on my high horse here, but it has to come back to the core problem that you saw. Like, why'd you get started? Why did you build this thing? You had a problem. What was that? Like, we get so caught up in trying to be more than we are to more people than we need to be that we lose sight of that. I
Yeah.
I so agree. So let's talk about, I'll circle back on that question later. Let's talk about
Okay.
this because we're here in the moment of marketing,
Yep.
sales and marketing alignment. Why do you think we're still having this conversation? When you peel back the onion, I remember having people on my podcast in 2019 where we were talking about sales enablement and this still being a tough topic then of like how to help these organizations work together. That's over 4 or 5 years ago. We're still here. This is still happening. So, in your experience, JD, of working with PE companies and sort of being the fixer upper for these problems, what's the core issue today? Is it still the same problem as 4 years ago? Has it changed? Why is this so hard?
Yeah. So I think it's fundamentally about getting both organizations aligned on the outcome we're trying to achieve. So this fall, I'm publishing a book. It's called The CRO's Guide to Winning in Private Equity. And you'll find out the details on my website. But I have a whole chapter about marketing in there, which really talks about the problem with most organizations is marketing has a set of objectives. You know, stage one leads, marketing qualified leads, visits to the website. Sales has a set of objectives, sales qualified opportunities, converted deals, blah, blah, blah. And in a lot of organizations, those two aren't actually perfectly aligned. And so, I worked with an organization that the marketing requirements and then BDRs are often stuck in the middle. Which parent are they reporting to? I actually like them to be kind of their third pillar. But so, I've seen organizations where the marketing team, all of their comp plans are about how many stage one opportunities do I generate? And so we know how to do that really effectively. We buy the right keywords. We can drive people to our website promising things. And look, I've maximized all these stage one opportunities. However, maybe the keywords that we've been maximizing aren't necessarily at the core of our solution. And so salespeople all of a sudden, get this lead and they say, this is garbage. I don't really sell this solution. I sell something, very tangential to that. Disqualify it, mark it off. And so, if sales and marketing aren't perfectly aligned on what good looks like, you start to get this finger pointing of marketing doesn't give me good enough leads, or I give sales all of these great leads and they don't know what to do with them. And you also see the same problems with attribution. Our data says it takes about 17 touches right now to get a cold prospect into, a sales cycle with you. Well, what are those touches? It's cold calls from a BDR, it's banner ads, it's keyword searches, it's LinkedIn connection requests, on and on and on and on. If it's taken me 17 touches from sales and marketing and BDRs and all these people doing this stuff, at the end, when you finally come to my webpage and you click, I want a demo, is that really an inbound lead? Or is it just that, that was finally the ultimate outcome? And so I think a lot of organizations are worried about credit taking, and it becomes like, oh, I'm claiming that lead. I created that, it came on an inbound form, or no, I was the person who made that outbound call. When really we need to get them aligned on, have we all done our piece to create a qualified opportunity? And if we have, that's what success is. And so for me, marketing is really about making sure that you get the objectives of the organization aligned on the big picture of our collaboration. You get the incentive plans aligned on, doing the right thing for the company. And then, yes, of course, we got to track our click-through rates. Of course, we have to track our return on ad spend and all the rest of it. But that's secondary to the biggest picture of what are we trying to accomplish in the whole marketing org. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, it makes a ton of sense. I have two thoughts and questions. The first one is, whose responsibility is it from top level marketing world to create alignment? We have the CMO, we have the CRO, we have the CEO, we have customer success who fits into that somewhere. It seems like there's a lot of cooks in this kitchen. So whose ultimate responsibility is it to say, this is what the goal is, and you all need to figure out how to make that happen. Is that
Yeah. Um, so here's where the communication PhD in me comes back is, I say the responsibility is actually good communication across all of those folks. I've worked in organizations, and right now I'm the CRO at Cantata, where all of those report into me. The marketing team reports to me, the sales team reports to me, the BDR team reports into me. And that makes it really easy for me to say, here's where we go. But I also first learned this concept of smarketing. I mentioned her name earlier, Andrea Brody. We worked at a company called Bravo Solution together, and she was the CMO, and I was basically the global head of sales. And we didn't report to we ultimately reported to CEO, but it wasn't really about the CEO dictating. It was about Andrea and I holding hands and really communicating clearly. So, as I consult with organizations on these topics, I care less about the org structure and more about, have you implemented a communications process where the heads of each of these divisions are constantly talking to each other, and really truly aligned. And then the other piece of it is, are we creating a team where I've got your back when you're failing? So, I was working with a CRO the other day, and they had just had a forecast call that they were like, our sales funnel is, our sales is not what it's supposed to be this month. And the first conversation was, well, what are the tricks that sales can do to get better? How can we fix sales here? But when they started to peel back the onion, it was like, okay, yes, sales can increase conversion and win more deals, but to get a single deal closed, you had to have how many opportunities? And to get that many opportunities, you had to have how many discovery calls? And to do that, how many BDR calls and all the rest of it. And if you're having a conversation about all of the metrics up and down that pyramid, then the leaders of the org can start to course correct and say, you know what, like our sales team needs some skills training. So we're going to have to overproduce qualified opportunities for a while as they're doing their skills training. Or, you know what, our marketing team is really struggling with, capturing people's attention right now. So sales is going to have to, overperform a little bit on their personal contributions into this. And I think as long as the heads of all of these they know what the metrics are, they're looking at them, but willing to participate as, multiple chefs in the stew and not just saying, I did my part, the rest is up to you. That's the magic.
so? There's two things that are happening here. One is depending on your sales, depending on your structure of your organization. If you have head of sales, like a CRO, and a head of marketing, the CMO, at the end of the day, it's up to them to come together and say, here's what needs to happen, and then
Yep.
work through their organizations to bring that alignment together. So it's ultimately up to them. It feels like, and I'm only saying this because I've now met with multiple CROs and I've been meeting with CMOs for the last 4 years. CROs are newer to me, so I'm figuring this out. But it feels like there's kind of needs to be, if you don't have that alignment, you're not able to create that sort of communication. There does need to be sort of a person in charge, a fall guy, one person calling all the shots, whether that's a CRO or a CMO. Because when you were a VP of sales, you led up into marketing, and now where you're a CRO, you have marketing leading up to you. And I
Right. Right.
feel like that's become that, I don't want to say standard, but there does seem to that the description of having a CRO and a CMO working together, I find more unusual. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not hearing it as often. So,
Unusual.
and
You don't see the two roles as often, or you don't see the two roles working together well.
I generally see the teams rolling up into one person, whether it's
Ah,
CRO or a CMO, but I don't see
okay.
both of those in the same organization.
Yep.
I'm not saying they don't exist. It's just in my experience for the last few conversations I've had that there seems to be one person in charge.
Yeah. Well, then I think it depends on the size of your company, right?
That was my question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
what
you
makes
know,
sense?
my whole career has been sort of tech companies that do 100 to $300 million in revenue. And so that's of a size where you can kind of have multiple executives. Certainly when I talk to folks who are at, small startups and their annual revenues are 5 million or something like that, then you do have to you have to kind of choose one leader and go with it. Um, the other player that I have been seeing a lot lately is a really strong operations office, um, because the COOs that I've worked with and the CEOs that I've worked with have said this isn't just a sales and marketing problem. This is across the whole organization. So you've got to help desk with, a bunch of people working on it who think their job is to come in every day and my boss yells at me that I didn't pick up the phone fast enough or I didn't close my calls, or resolve the calls, 2 minutes faster, or whatever it is. And what the ops people and the great CEOs say is it's not about dictating to someone, you got to pick up the phone in 3 minutes, so go comply. It's about helping them see the very top picture. What are we trying to do as a company this year? We're trying to grow revenue 20%. How are we going to do that? Well, we need to retain 98% of our clients. How do we do that? We have to have a great net promoter score. How do we do that? We give great service, which then translates into, oh, okay. So when I pick up the phone on the first ring and I resolve the call on the first call, that leads to a happy customer, that leads to a renewal, that leads to the company plan. And so, a lot of times I see now operations folks, managing a whole company-wide reporting structure on all the key metrics in the business, and then driving those executive discussions about, where are we missing our targets and how do we all collectively adapt to accommodate.
I love that you brought up the operations piece. I think they are becoming the bridge to truly understanding opportunities because it's in those gaps of how we function where we can get better. And I also think it's not pointing to everything we've been saying about pointing fingers, right? It's like it's not about pointing fingers. Here's a great example. So I work for a marketing leader. I just joined on for a law firm, and one of the wonderful things that they did was for their intake team. Of one of the things we looked at is, well, the intake team isn't able to make all the calls, right? There's a lot of calls going to voicemail. Well, why is that? Well, that's because probate people are calling up and trying to understand what their options are. And probate is such a headache. It's such a headache. And generally, they don't close or they get referred to a partner who can do it, which is a nice, chip back, but it's not really the work that this law firm wants to be doing in line of helping families and estate plan thoughtfully. So it became less about volume of leads and more about how can we reduce voicemails and missed calls and allow
Mhm.
these people, the intake team, to have more thoughtful conversations with the right people. And so the only way to see that's through operations. And I think that gets so missed when we're just trying to say lead volume and it's got to start at the top of the funnel and then bleed down. And I love what you were saying too earlier in regards to like how can one team help the other of like, okay, this is what marketing needs to do right now. We do need to fill the funnel a little bit, but that's because sales just needs more reps. They just need a bit more practice and it's going to be okay. And then
Right.
for on the flip side to say, hey, marketing can't get enough eyeballs, so sales has got to kick in. And yeah, I think it has to come back from the top, from the CEO, the CMO, the CRO, of like, what is it we're trying to accomplish? And then working through the teams. It comes back to communication. Let's talk about that for a second, JD, because you said that there's like sort of a framework that has to happen between these teams to get an alignment. So, where do you see the biggest gap in communication of these teams not working together? Is it just not talking? Is it a meeting they need to have more often? Like, help these
Yeah.
teams come together. Give us the playbook.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly as a communication PhD, like I think the answer to everything is always communication, and volume will help. The every time I talk with people who are bickering, it's like, well, what did you say when you talk to them about it? Oh, I've been avoiding them. Okay, great. Get in the room and have the conversation. Are you meeting? How frequently? You're meeting once a month. Why don't you try every other week? Why don't you try every day? Because just sitting in the room is going to make that happen for you. Um, but but if you've got a good connection happening, it's ultimately about aligning on what is the data that is the indicator of success for us. So we've been doing win-loss analysis, and if you ask a seller, at the end of every deal that closes, every deal we won is because I was the very best salesperson. Every deal we lost was because the product is terrible, right? And that's all about personal point of view. If you ask the product person, it's like, oh, every deal we won was my product was amazing. Every deal we lost is the seller didn't know how to articulate it. So, it's in these conversations, it's really looking at what is the measure we're going to use, and then let's look at the metrics, and then that'll inform where we go. So, our win-loss data is much better. We're using an outside company called Closed that does, independent third-party interviews, and they can quickly tell you, like, I just got a briefing from them this morning. We talked to 20 deals that you closed out in the last month. When you won, here's why they said you won. When you lost, here's why they say you lost. And we as a company have agreed that that data set, no matter what it says for me and my personal interest, that's the data set we're going to rely on when we make decisions about what to do next.
I think that's so helpful to get a third party involved. And I think just listening to the sales calls to hear for yourself, I've been doing this. It's the beauty of onboarding, right? You get to dig into all the data and you get to be far removed from it because it wasn't your data. It's just the data that currently
Right.
exists. For this law firm, the reason why they keep losing deals is because it's nothing that anybody's doing wrong. It's that they're not physically in the location. They want somewhere close. They want somebody closer.
Right. Right.
Nothing you can do about that, right? We can certainly tailor our marketing to be more centric in terms of the location, and we'll fix that. But it's just like, oh, this isn't a me problem. This isn't personal. It's not about, I literally don't have a location near you. You don't want to do this remotely. And you want somebody down the street. Good on you.
Right.
But I
But
do
maybe that
think,
data is going to inform your strategy about where you
yeah,
hire the next
absolutely.
lawyer, or where you are,
No, totally. And the point is, though, and what I love what you're saying is it informs your strategy. And if you can look at it from that perspective of not taking it personally, right? I find that a lot of this finger pointing is because everybody feels in trouble.
yeah.
Is that
And
fair?
yeah, I mean, people feel in trouble. We're human. It hurts to hear that, what I did was ugly, when maybe what I did was really ugly and I need to improve on it. That hurts. And I think, sometimes, you know, I'm really confused about the economy right now. Do people think the economy is good or bad? That, the
Just hang on
stock
to your
market
hats.
data is like better than it's ever been before, but everyone is doing layoffs and things. You layer that kind of uncertainty in too, and suddenly now employees are like, oh, I don't really want to have a candid assessment about what went right or wrong here, because what if it was
Yeah.
that I was the problem? Um, it takes a big person, and it's hard. It's hard to be like, if I was really the thing that made us fail here, well, let's identify it so I can fix it and do better next time. It's much easier to say, I don't want to be probed that deeply. Keep the microscope away from me.
You need the right culture to be able
Absolutely.
to allow people to fail. How does that work in sales? I find that that's got to be, I feel like that's probably a little easier in marketing and a little easier in product, unless you ship code that shouldn't have shipped. Not call you out CrowdStrike, but call you out CrowdStrike. Generally speaking, I feel like sales are on the front line of that, and I can appreciate why they feel a little bit more intimidated about talking about how they could have done better. Does culture play a piece to that in terms
Absolutely.
of,
And you have to have a culture of a company of, we're willing to be called out for, we also have to have a culture at a company that it's okay to fail. The best cultures I work for say, we want to fail. We want to fail quickly so that we can learn from it. Um, one of the things that the stats that I keep telling my sales teams is world-class sales organizations win about 35% of their opportunities, 1 in 3. By definition, that means the majority of the sales you're engaged in, you're going to lose. So when someone says you lost this deal, let's understand why. It's not shame on you. It's not you're going to get fired. It's not, that kind of stuff. It's let's understand what happened there so that, maybe you're only winning 30% of your deals. How can I find that incremental thing that'll help you win 35 or 36 or 37 and beat the odds there? But it comes from introspection. We're sitting in the middle of the Olympics right now, and I was listening to an Olympic swimmer talk about the relationship with their coach, and he said, I don't remember who the coach was, but the swimmer was like, what I like about my coach, he's been with me for 8 years or 9 years or whatever, and every day he knows everything about my body and the way I move in the water, and he's really quick to tell me, put your finger here, you did this weird thing with your wrist, and the swimmer, that's a very personal, like it's commenting on you and your body and what you did. But the swimmer had gotten over all the ego of I feel insulted about this and really just took it as here's performance feedback. And now the next time, I'm going to remember my coach told me, put my finger here. And it's those incremental changes that make the difference.
Oh my God, feedback is so hard. It's
Why
so
do you think it's
hard.
hard though? Hard to give, hard to receive.
Both. Oh, both. I mean, I think if we're empathetic people, giving feedback is always feeling like, how's this going to make this person feel? And are they going to be okay? And like, I need to give it because as I want them to do better and I want to do better. And it's hard to for all the reasons you said. It's hard to hear because especially as people who put so much into our work, it's feeling very personal. I was a photographer. I went to school for photography, and I had to go through critiques. Oh my gosh, more often than I care to admit. And the point of critiques is really about getting used to feedback. And I gotta say, that didn't even break, like, I didn't come out of all those critiques at the end of senior year feeling like I could take a critique. It felt harder and worse. It really did. And it's because it feels so personal. And so for somebody to be commenting about your body and the way you move, like, that takes a really big person to move beyond that. I think we you know, all struggle with hearing feedback and taking it personally. And this is a moment in time where I feel like there's an inflection happening where we're starting to realize that it's not personal, but we have to build it into our culture of you're not going to be fired. Us showing up and giving you feedback on how to do better next time isn't going to get you fired. Now, for showing up consistently about the same feedback and there's no change in your behavior, then things are going to escalate.
Right.
But if we're talking about opportunities and helping you grow over time, embrace it, own it, get better. I'll also say that the feedback hits hard at first and then you sort of like ride the wave and like do the self-talk through I'm not in trouble and you come out the other side and figure out how to iterate on it and that helps too. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know
I
why
think
we
it's
come
a
from a generation of in trouble, but we come from a generation of in trouble.
well, though I think it's about a volume thing too. I think giving you critical feedback is hard. And again, here's the communication PhD in me, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. And so a lot of people shy away from it. And so even though like I notice whatever it is today, I think, oh, is that big enough that I really want to hurt her feelings and I avoid it and I avoid it. And so I don't give you any feedback until
That's
I am
worse.
so upset with you. Our relationship is so broken. And then I show up and I'm like, here's all the things that are terrible. And I've decided I'm going to fire you today. And that's why it has that stereotype.
Yeah.
If as leaders, we can every day give people feedback constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Carrie, loved the podcast. Next time, let's do blah, 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 blah. And that's just part of the routine, then
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel so fraught. And, good feedback and feedback. You get
You
better
need
and better, and it's
both.
part of your culture.
Yeah, you need both and it's part of your culture. I totally agree. I think that's I think that's so important. When you're talking to sales teams in particular, because it sounds like CR generally heads up sales teams, what's sort of some of the feedback you're giving your sales folks to help them get incrementally better?
So I always like salespeople to ask for feedback from their clients. My favorite way to end a sales call is, so how did what we talked about today line up with what you expected? And it's just super open-ended, like I've come in, I've pitched my product or I've done my demo, and now I'm asking you to give me feedback. How did what I just did meet your expectations or not? And then shut your mouth and listen. And a lot of times you ask the question and there's silence, and you have to be patient and wait and wait and don't fill it, because the first thing that they tell you and the second thing they tell you is going to be stuff that you're going to learn and grow from.
Oh my gosh. Asking for feedback is so helpful because I feel like you're a bit more disarmed in being able to receive it.
Because people are afraid to give it. And so if I keep asking you, when we
Mhm.
hang up today, Carrie, was that a good podcast guest? What could I have done differently? Because you might not proactively tell me on your own, because it's easy to avoid. It's easy to just hang up and be done.
I'm going to end every show with, yeah, I'm going to hang up, but I'm going to ask everyone, how could I have been a better host for you? I'm totally doing that. I appreciate that. No, I think that's really key. And I think that's so, the more we can ask for feedback, the more we can be open to it, the more we can grow. I also
Yeah.
think we need to be a bit braver in giving feedback. And it's not always going to feel good. It's going to feel squishy. It's going to feel hard. But I agree with you that if we don't do that, then we get to the end or somebody gets fired and they're like, wait, what? The worst is when somebody gets to an annual review and they're like, I've never heard any of this feedback. Why am I hearing it the first time after a year? Right? Like, oh, got to get out in front of it. Crucial conversations are really, really important. And I love how you're talking about bringing in outside. I do think there's an element of hearing it outside of the organization coming from a client is a little easier, especially from a prospect who you haven't really built. You're working on building rapport, but it's not ingrained yet. And getting fresh feedback from that perspective takes the edge off as well. So oh, I think that's wonderful. In terms of marketing and sales alignment and all of us owning our ability to do better on both sides. I just asked you about sales. What about marketing? If you were sitting with a marketing team and you were to give them thoughtful feedback about one thing that they could do to either do what they do better or align better with sales, what would your feedback be for them?
Um, I think it's get into the field, right? Listen to sales calls, listen to customers. Um, you know, the more time you can spend with your ultimate end customer, the better. I think marketing people are brilliant, and it's hard to do all the artistic and creative stuff that a marketing team produces. It's also then a very personal thing that, I crafted this, and criticism of it is going to be wounding to me, right? Um, but once you've released that piece of content into the wild, go see how it's go see how people pick it up and engage with it. You as a photographer, in some ways, your job was done when the photo was framed and stuck on the wall. But actually the relationship that the viewer is going to have is just started. And so I think you become a better photographer when you see people in the gallery look at your photo, and are they having the response you expected them to have, or is it achieving a totally different goal you didn't expect? And that's again
And
like,
those are the KPIs, right? Those, I feel like marketing has a little bit of an easier job with key performance indicators than sales. Sales is revenue. You got to close deals and we need revenue. For marketing, it is those higher level metrics. It's those impressions, the click through rate, the conversion rate. It's all working through the funnel. The big question I have for you, JD, as we round out here, that I feel like is the big question mark hanging in the air for so many folks, especially on the marketing side, maybe for sales, is it's a new world in terms of how marketing and sales is working, period. It's a new buyer. They don't see it, like it, buy it. And it's by committee and it's
yeah.
you know, account-based marketing. It's all these aspects that are sort of falling into place and making it a little harder for marketers. What's your piece of advice? You mentioned talking to them, yes. In terms of key performance indicators, is it lead volume at the end of the day that they should be looking at? Do we all need to rally around revenue?
Well, I
What
think
is it for
ultimately it's,
you?
yeah, I mean, ultimately it is about revenue. So volume is a piece of it. Um, but then it's what happened with those leads. So I talk a lot about sales velocity, which is the number of opportunities times the size of the opportunity times your conversion rate divided by how long did it take for that deal to close. And so, yes, volume is one of those things. And so if you do that math, it's like how many dollars did we generate a day? Um, volume is great, but you need the quality of like, did you create a bunch of $5 leads for me or $5,000 leads for me? And then what's the conversion? If you created 100 opportunities for me and only 1% actually results in a sale, I'd rather you just create 5 opportunities and 20% of them, win.
Yeah.
So it's really getting that whole piece of, at the end of the day, it is about revenue, but it's volume, size, and conversion metrics that I think is what we want to measure on the marketing side.
It sounds like that really lends itself to the ICP then.
Yep.
Who is delivering those bigger deals versus those smaller deals? And the balancing act between the two.
Yeah.
Um, I think if the smaller deals are coming in and they're easy and they're not a big deal, then that's not a problem if you can close lots of them
Right.
um,
And that comes back to that alignment in the beginning of what's our
in
strategy.
the time.
I can run a
Yeah.
great company saying all we do is close $10,000 deals and we can close them in 2 days and be done. I can run a great company that says all we do is close $1 million deals and we spend 6 months on them.
Yeah.
You may wind up at the same revenue number. We have to align on which strategy are we chasing, how much does each strategy cost, which makes the most sense to where we want to be.
I have to wonder if there's opportunity for both and if there's some marketing ops opportunity in there to come in and say, here's how we can streamline smaller deals and here's how we can make your larger deals a little easier. Full circle here, JD, in terms of the different teams you need to like make all of this happen. I'm so grateful for how you brought us all together and how you help us continue to work better together. It's just where we need to get to. And I so hurts that it's taking this long, but I feel like having some of these core strategies of communication, of having the right teams in place, and having those core KPIs of what we need to be looking at is a clear next step for us all. Before we close out, JD, one question I love to ask in the beginning, but I held because we were so in the flow of things, is what's a challenge for you right now? What's hard as CRO of these companies that have been bought by PE? What's in your way right now?
Yeah. So right now, my biggest thing is this question about the economy. And I am really scratching my head trying to understand, you know, what the data and the economists say is happening in the economy and what the emotions of my buyers say is happening in the economy.
Yeah.
Um, if you've got the crystal ball on that, that's the big thing for me. Because look, if the economy is great, we know the message to tell you how to do well in a great economy. If the economy is terrible, we know the message for that too. We got to get alignment on which one is it that we're
Which one's
swimming
happening?
in, so that we know how to talk.
I feel like we've been on the brink of a recession for years. So, and then we had a blip on Monday. I don't know what's happening. I'm with you. I, one day at a time. One day at a time is all I got for you. But I love that you're talking about the different messaging depending on which way it goes. So we all need to be paying attention to
That's
that.
right.
JD, last question for you. As humans, you're more than a CRO and a salesperson and a marketer. What are you most looking forward to? We're more than halfway through the year. Summer is wrapping up. What 2024? What are you most looking forward to in the next few months?
Yeah. So I'm doing a bunch of trips right now. My husband is on the board of a theater performing arts venue in Chicago, and so we're doing a lot of trips right now, looking at acts, dance companies, and concerts that may be coming to Chicago. So the rest of the year is
That's
sort
so
of getting
cool.
to look at those things and figure out how we convince them to choose our local theater as the next venue.
Yeah, come local. Yes. Yeah, and then you get to see him whenever you want. That sounds amazing.
It's super fun. Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to see what his next show is going to be. I'm gonna be paying attention, JD. I look forward to seeing where he ends up.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this conversation.
Oh, I appreciate it.
And yes, and thank you to our listeners for joining in with us at this 3 p.m. Eastern Time. As I mentioned, in 2 weeks, we'll be moving to 11 a.m., so stay tuned for that. This episode was brought to you by MKG Marketing, the digital marketing agency that helps complex brands and like cybersecurity get found via SEO and digital ads. It's hosted by me, Carrie Gard, CEO and co-founder of MKG Marketing. And this episode is produced by the company called Snappy. If you would like to be a guest, DM me. I'd love to have you on, especially as we gear up for the Cybersecurity Marketing Con in December, which I will be at, and I can't wait to meet you there. Thank you all so much. JD, thank you so much. What a show. I'm so grateful.
Bye-bye.